In this lesson, we're going to look a little more at processing lists with for loops. Let's open up a new program. We'll call it forList.py. And let's begin by creating a list of the first 10 integers. So there's our list. Then to refresh your memory, to access each element in the list, I simply create a variable and say for that variable in the list, and then perform some sort of task on that element. In this case, we just want to print. So this will print 1 to align each number in the list. So let's save the program, go back to our command line, and run it. And there's our list of the first 10 integers. Besides the standard way that we use the for loop, we can also use the for loop with the index, by indexing into the list. So for example, let me demonstrate what indexing means, in case you're not familiar with the term. Number sub 0 will give me access to the first element of the list, 1, because we start counting at the 0 element. So if I want to access each element 0 through 9, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for I in range 0, length of numbers, like so, print numbers sub I. So let's see how this program works. Save it, go back to our DOS prompt, clear the screen, run it again, and we get the same result. Now, one thing you might want to do when you're working with a list of elements is access some partial set of the complete list. For example, what if I want to display all of the odd elements in the list? Well, I can't do it using the standard for loop, but I can do it using the indexing version that we're looking at here. In fact, all I have to do is add one more element to my range function, and that's an increment to say go from 0 to 1 to 2, then 3 to 4. In other words, skip an element each time. So let me demonstrate for you how that works. Save this file, come back to our command line, clear the screen, and there's 13579. So we could do that at any increment that we wanted to. So for example, I could do it to 3, save the file, run it again, and there's 1, 4, 7, and 10. So it's important to understand that even though the primary use of a for loop is to access each element in a sequence, it's not necessary to do so. And if we want to modify that process, what we have to do is we have to specify some type of range, because range provides us with a set we can iterate over, and then index into the sequence to access the elements in the range that we've specified. In the exercises a bit later in the chapter, we're going to demonstrate a more practical use of this technique. But for now, I'd like to move on to the next lesson where we're going to demonstrate how to use for loops with tuples. In this lesson, we're going to examine how to use for loops with tuples. And in all honesty, working with tuples is very similar to working with lists, but we'll still go through the process just so you can see how it looks. So we're going to start a new program. We'll call it forTuples.py. So the first thing we'll do is create a tuple of 5 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This time, rather than just display the numbers, let's call that numbers instead of number. We'll compute the sum. And we'll also print each number. And then we'll print sum is plus string sum. And let's run this first program. So we'll save, we'll leave it open because we're going to use it again. And we'll type forTuples.py. And there are numbers, and the sum is 15, which is correct. So let's comment out this code, and let's look at another example using strings. Clearly, working with tuples is exactly like working with lists. So let's look at a different example and just demonstrate how to compute with tuples and for loops. What we're going to do is we're going to create a tuple of words. We'll display the words first. Let's run that code. Let's clear the screen. So there are our words. Then we want to figure out which word is the longest. So to do that, we're going to compare the lengths of each word as we go through the list. But what we need to do is we need to identify the word that's the longest. So what we're going to do is we're going to use indexed access into the tuple. And we're going to create a variable max and assign it the index position 0. So we're going to assume that the first word in the tuple is the longest word. Then we're going to create a range starting at 1 through the length of the tuple words. And then we're going to do a comparison. So we're going to say if the len of words sub I is greater than the len of words sub max, in other words, the 0th position, then max becomes that index value. And that's all we have to do. Then we'll say print the longest word is plus words sub max. So what's going to happen is that we're going to assume that now is the longest word. That assumption was made when we set max equals 0. Then we'll look at is and compare its length to now. It's not the longest, so max will not change. Then we'll go to time. The length of time is longer than the length of now, so now max will become that value, which will be 2. So right here, max will be assigned 2. Then we'll compare the next word, the, which is not longer than time, so max will end up at 2. Then when we print the longest word, this value will be word sub 2, which will be time. So let's save the program, clear the screen, and there's our result. So this for loop is just a very typical way to find a maximum value in a sequence of elements by assigning the first element to be the maximum value and then performing a comparison of each subsequent value and then replacing the value of max with an index if indeed some other element is larger than the initial element that was assigned by default. So that wraps up this lesson on for loops and tuples, and we're ready to move to the next lesson where we're going to examine the use of for loops with dictionaries.